All righty, everyone. Happy Global Volunteer Month. And next week, don't forget, is National Volunteer Week. So I hope you all have some fun ideas on how to recognize and appreciate your volunteers planned. We're doing some spotlights on program volunteers on the TCAD Facebook page. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I encourage you to do so and like some of our photos. Maybe we're highlighting some of your volunteers. Next week, we're also going to release the 2024 Volunteer Impact Report. So thank you to everyone who contributed to that over the last few months. For our first-time attendees, my name is Sydney Enns, and I'm the Director of Volunteer Engagement at the Tennessee Commission. Somehow my mic just muted. That was weird. So we've been doing this series for about 5 years now, and all of our presentations from January 2020 are posted on the TCAD's YouTube channel. So if you're interested in checking anything out, please feel free to head over there. By the end of the day tomorrow, I'll have this presentation posted along with a follow-up email with all of the session resources for those who have registered. I do want to do my typical disclaimer that these webinars are being recorded, so please be sure to keep information confidential when we're talking about volunteers, clients, and community partners. No need to call anybody out by name. Now is also the time if you want to turn off your cameras, please feel free to do that. And also be sure to keep yourself on mute to reduce background noise for our speaker. If I hear background noise, I'll mute you. I don't mean to be mean, just want to respect our speaker's time. I also encourage you all to use the reactions function to give our presenter some feedback throughout the presentation and stay engaged in the discussion. So everybody go ahead and take a minute to find their reaction buttons. It's up there at the top. And tell me how you're feeling today. So mine would be the surprised face because it's been a day packed full of new items to add to my to-do list. Anybody else? It's also important to remember that everything we talk about on these webinars is not a requirement for you to implement in your programs. They're simply best practices through research and experiences. However, we're going to have an amazing presentation, so I'm sure you're going to want to implement everything that Alex is going to talk to us about. So if you want to incorporate any suggestion or strategy, please be sure to have the support of your supervisor or manager before moving forward in that process. Stewarding and engaging volunteers is such a great topic to talk about during the month that is dedicated to our amazing volunteer workforce. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to our speaker to introduce herself and start our discussion. So everyone, please join me with the applause reaction and welcoming Alex to the series. Alex, thank you so much for speaking with our group today on such an important topic.
That's a hard act to follow, Sydney. I don't know why I'm even bothering to present because that was one of the best presentation introductions I think I've ever gotten. So thank you for that. And thank you all for the applause in advance. I hope I live up to your every expectation. I am going to go ahead and share my screen here so you can see my presentation. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay. Thank y'all for letting me join you today. I love talking about all things volunteer. I've been in my role for almost 14 years. And like Sydney said, with Volunteer Appreciation Week coming up in just a few days, we are all ready for it. And Sydney, I'm going to ask you, since I am only seeing my presentation, if you'll just kind of keep me posted on questions or comments, that would be awesome.
Absolutely, no problem.
So I don't know how many of you know anything about Shepherd Center. We are based in Atlanta, Georgia. We are the largest freestanding not-for-profit hospital that does what we do. We do rehab for people with spinal cord injuries, spinal cord disease, acquired brain injury, multiple sclerosis, spine and chronic pain, neuromuscular disorders like Guillain-Barré syndrome. We have people who come from all across the country. We've even had international patients. You may very well know somebody from your own home community who has come to us for treatment. We started because about 48 years ago, James Shepherd was on a really amazing post-college trip. He was backpacking around. He was body surfing in Brazil, caught the perfect wave. The perfect wave caught him and pinned him down in water. And luckily, this was back in the 70s, and before Don't Move a Person was really widespread because his friend pulled him out of the water. If not, James would have drowned. Imagine now in the days of wall phones in the kitchen, y'all know cell phones, no faxes, no texting, anything like that. Your 23-year-old child is in Brazil and you're in Atlanta, Georgia, and you get this phone call. And so after several weeks when James was stable enough to be transferred back home to Atlanta. He was at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital, which is actually right next door to us. And they tried to figure out what's next steps. And his family was told, it's really almost kind of like you're lucky he's alive. And that was about as good as it got. And luckily, his very determined parents said that's not good enough for us. They went to a center in Colorado that did rehab for spinal cord injury, and they saw hope and positivity in patients in wheelchairs and in therapy gyms and said, this is it. So James did his rehab there. And then when he came back, people kept saying there should be something like that in Atlanta. So in 1975, James and his family started Shepherd Center, and we were a 6-bed unit of a now defunct hospital in Atlanta. We currently have 152 patient beds. Our average census is about 135. Patients are here for, on average, about 48 days. And so when they come to Shepherd Center, they also bring a family member with them, whether it's spouse, partner, sibling, loved one, best friend, whatever it is, so that they have support from people who know them well throughout this journey. So we are a unique kind of an organization, and it's a really special place. We lost James, I think it was 4 years ago this December. We lost his father, Harold, the year before that. His mother, Alana, is going to be 94 in June. She has more energy than all of us put together. I often say I want to know what she puts on her Wheaties because I would like some of that. So the family is still very present here. So just wanted to kind of level set so you have a little bit of background on where I work. So one of the things that I know you all think about when you have volunteers who are coming to our organizations, and we all think about this, is all the different reasons that people want to volunteer. For some, it's I've retired now and I want to find something else to do with my time, or my children have left home and I have all this time on my hands and I need to feel needed or valued somewhere. Some people choose to volunteer because they're new to a community. It's a great way to plug in and get to know more about it. Some of them want leadership skills. We have a lot of students who come to us, especially those, excuse me, interested in physical therapy, because it's a great opportunity for them to get some side-by-side hands-on experience and see what it's really like to be a physical therapist. Some people just want to make new friends. Maybe their social circle has shrunk, or all the people that they used to socialize with have kind of changed what they're doing in their lives. Some people are looking for career changes. Before COVID, we saw a lot of that. A lot of people in their late 30s who maybe began a certain career and said, this isn't for me anymore. I don't want to be a banker. I want to do something that is giving back more to mankind. And so they volunteered with us and ended up going into careers in healthcare. There's so many different reasons that people start to volunteer with an organization, but what is key, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but what is key is how we keep them connected with our mission and engaged that they want to stay with us. Getting them in the door is one thing, keeping them is a whole nother story. And a lot of times when you're trying to onboard volunteers, for us, for many hospitals, really nationally, and I use hospitals because that's my industry, orientation is the last step in the process. So you do your application, you do your required paperwork, your medical, your background, your drug screen, the whole 9 yards. You get your assignment, and then you go to hospital orientation. And that's fine if you're in kind of a traditional hospital setting. You've got maybe an emergency room or a mother baby unit, something like that. We're a different kind of hospital. And so we do orientation at the beginning because we want people to understand what kind of organization we are and what those placements look like before they get on board and go through all that. Because if I'm going to make you go to the doctor's office and get all your medical screening, I'm going to make you do a drug screen, I'm going to make you do a background check, and then you find out this is not where you want to volunteer, you're not going to be happy with me. So we want to make sure that when they come in, they understand what the volunteer experience is like within any organization, and also what some of the placements are and what that means. No, you are not going to be doing physical therapy on patients. Yes, you will be volunteering in a physical therapy setting and observing, making sure they do that. We also want to make sure that before we even place volunteers somewhere, that whoever the person is who's going to manage them directly in that placement actually knows how to do that. We've all have some really awesome teammates who might be really great at their job and might be really terrible at supervising volunteers because they just haven't done it before and they don't have the tools that they need to be successful. So make sure they've got buy-in on having a volunteer in the first place. Force placing volunteers is only going to end badly for everybody. Make sure they understand the difference between what they can ask of a staff member versus a volunteer. I love that volunteers get so fully integrated into a work setting. That's really wonderful. It shows that the team embraces them. The downside is when they forget, oh, well, Susie's a volunteer, so I can't get mad at her for taking a vacation and not being here for 3 weeks because she's on a fabulous family trip. Or, yeah, I can't ask her to do the thing. So making sure that those staff members who are going to oversee volunteers really truly understand what the volunteer is there to do, how they can supervise, and how to best communicate with you. Feeling engaged, as you know, is really key to volunteer success. It's one thing to get you in the door, but we want you to feel connected to the work that we do in our organizations. We want you to feel valued and appreciated and like we know who you are. I am really, really fortunate that I don't have to ask staff members to recognize and appreciate my volunteers. It's part of the culture here at Shepherd, which makes my job a whole lot easier because they automatically do it. They see a volunteer come in and they say, thank you, and thanks so much for your hard work, and I really appreciate you. And the volunteers feel comfortable asking if there's something else they want to learn about that is maybe connected with their placement. And that's fantastic. That means so much. During COVID, when we didn't have volunteers, when the world shut down for a year and a half, I had staff members who were staying in touch with their volunteers. They're not my volunteers, they're their volunteers. They stayed in touch with them because they had built personal relationships. And so we knew how those volunteers were doing and they felt connected to Shepherd. And so when things opened back up, they were beating down the doors to come in. So making sure that people feel engaged is key to our success. And then, of course, making sure that a volunteer placement actually means something to your organization as well as to what the volunteers are going to do. I don't know about you, but I often, even after all these years, have people come and say, hey, do you have a volunteer who's available? Because I need such and such done kind of right now. And I joke about, do they think I have this imaginary closet full of volunteers that is just sitting there waiting for something to do? We all know that is not reality. And also, we don't want to create a placement just because one particular volunteer says, I want to come in and rock the babies on Tuesdays from 9 to 10. If we don't have a need for that in an organization, why would we create that placement? So making sure that we're creating needs that actually support the organization and where volunteers will feel useful versus here, they've asked me to take all the sticky notes off this pad, and that's my volunteer job. So keeping those things in mind as we're preparing to onboard volunteers, as we're creating new placements, as we're working with our peers across the organization, if we don't address those barriers, we're going to have trouble. So what makes a good volunteer manager? And I'm sure all of you are really good volunteer managers. But this is one of my favorite graphics because we have all worked for the boss. We've all worked for the people who sit there and say, I need you and all of you people to go do the thing. And I'm going to sit here and watch you do it. And every now and then there's a time where you need that. I don't know about you. I would much rather be the leader. I often say that I will never ask my team or a volunteer to do something that I would not do myself or that I wouldn't be willing to jump in and do with them, unless there's some reason that they are qualified to do something that I'm not. But if you were seen as a leader versus the boss, people want to get on your bus. People want to partner with you within the organization from a staff perspective. They're willing to help you come up with creative ways to place volunteers. And you're creating a real sense of belonging and pride in your volunteer base because they say, oh, that's our volunteer leader. They're amazing. That director, that manager, whatever your title is, they're so great. They're so excited about all the volunteers in our organization. They make me really proud to be a volunteer. So I always like to keep that, especially in high stress times when it's really easy to be the boss. And sometimes that's at least my tendency when I'm in high stress mode, to remember that I want to be the leader and not the boss. It really makes a difference. And while you might not think about it, people see it. So thinking about opportunities, this is Deetra. She is my Friday afternoon mail volunteer. We have volunteers who deliver patient mail to all our inpatient rooms on weekday afternoons. And as you can imagine, you're really popular when you deliver mail because we're not bringing credit card bills or bank statements. We're bringing care packages and cards from home and things like that. So if you're creating a new volunteer opportunity, or maybe you're looking at your current list of placements and thinking, is it relevant? Does it make sense? Do we still need these roles? Thinking about what the absolute requirements are. So in order for the volunteer to be successful and meet the needs of the department, what do we need? Is there some sort of specific skill set they need? Things I think about, because I work at a hospital where I have former patients who volunteer, and some of them are wheelchair users, and some of them have other ambulation challenges, and some of them may be brain injury survivors. So things like, does the person need to be able to reach a high shelf to do this job successfully, to do this volunteer placement? Because that's a concern. If you're working with maybe a senior volunteer who uses a walker, maybe reaching heavy things on a high shelf isn't going to be a good fit for them. But they might be really great on the phone, and that's somebody who can make some follow-up phone calls. What are the tasks that need to be done, and what are the days and times of service? I did a SWOT analysis for my department about a year ago. And I don't know about you, but I forget that everybody outside of my team doesn't know every little thing about placing volunteers in the hospital, because it's not their job to know that. It's my job to know that, and my team's. And so I would send out emails and say, hey, if you need a volunteer, let us know. And I would get crickets back. Well, sometimes you have to provide an example of how a volunteer can be used. And the problem was that people weren't seeing a volunteer doing the work that was helpful to them. So if you work in medical records, you don't need a volunteer gym runner in a therapy gym that has no crossover in your area of work. And so we got better about demonstrating examples of different places where volunteers were working. I have a volunteer we placed in our durable medical equipment department. It was before her role came back post-COVID. She was super personable, former patient, one of these kind of sunshiny people who just brightens a room she walks into. That department had been short-staffed and had a lot of turnover, and they were behind on follow-up phone calls and distribution of some really basic handout information that needed to go to people pre-discharge, saying, here's your list of vendors, here's who's providing your wheelchair, your walker, whatever it may be. It just had to be handed out, and then a handful of follow-up phone calls, but the staff didn't have time to do it. And I said to the manager, well, a volunteer could do that, right? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, let me call her. And she did it, and it totally lightened the load of that department. And they were so grateful. And they used her for a year and a half after that until they got fully staffed again. But what was great about that placement was now I could go to other administrative departments and say, here's something else a volunteer can do. It helped them see it better. And sometimes you have to be the one to help them visualize. So understanding tasks, and then what are the days and times of service? I had a conversation with somebody. I said, look, the best acid test for a volunteer is if the volunteer doesn't show up, does the work of the department continue? And is there a certain time that they need to be there? Or do you just want to know they're going to come some weekday between 9 and 3? So make sure you're really clear on what those requirements are so that you can translate those over to people who are applying to volunteer. And I put things in writing as much for me and the requesting department as for that volunteer, because sometimes you get the volunteer who says, oh, I didn't realize you needed me to come every week. I just wanted to come, now and then. I just want to drop in when I'm not playing with my grandkids. Or, that doesn't really work for my schedule. I thought it was something I could do from home. So making sure that everybody's on the same page about what is the expectation of the volunteer placement so that you can be successful all around. This picture is of my fantastic team of coworkers. That is us dressed as all the Barbies and Kens for Halloween. We like Halloween and we like costumes here at Shepherd Center. And so, some fun visuals are always a good thing. In terms of further engaging volunteers, think about who the local leader is in that area. So if you've got a particular unit that is requesting a volunteer, who's the lead on that? Who's the person who asked you for it? You want their buy-in and their engagement, but you also need them to help you craft that placement description, because not only are they going to make sure they're going to add things that you and I don't think about, because it's not our job to think about things. They're the ones who work in that area, but they're also going to help us really get everybody else in that department on board. I know in some organizations, you might have one person in an area who says, oh, it'd be so great to have a couple of volunteers to help us with this. And everybody else in the department says, we don't need a volunteer. I don't want a volunteer. Why are we bringing a volunteer? If you've got that local leader who can also help explain to their peers and to their team how a volunteer can add value, again, you're more likely to be successful. That volunteer is going to have a better experience. And then think about champions, maybe in similar departments. If you're having trouble illustrating the benefit of a volunteer to a certain department, maybe there's a similar department. Maybe medical records already has a volunteer, and you've got a comparable department who could benefit from somebody doing the same kind of work. have that person already hosting a volunteer talk to their peer in the other department. Because sometimes they see us coming and they think, well, you're just trying to put more volunteers in and I really don't want one. And all they see is us coming to them, providing a really important benefit. But if their peer says, oh my gosh, let me tell you, since we've had Carol volunteering with us, we've been able to focus so much more on this really important part of our work. We have taken less of the busy work because Carol is happy to do that for us. It's made such a difference. Our efficiency is up, our productivity is up, however they want to sell it. Sometimes that's the right person to have help you make that sell to that other department about a really great use of volunteers. The hardest part, and I am bad at this sometimes, is delegating. Um, so in order to delegate, we need to be willing to trust, of course, the other people around us, but you need to understand what's got to be done. And so if you have a really clear understanding of the need of a volunteer, or the need for a volunteer in an area, and you can set that up, then you can set that out and you can engage volunteers in that way. Sometimes it's a big project and somebody says, I need all this help, and you can figure out ways to plug volunteers in, but thinking about that. We all know that when we're asked to help with a project, we would rather do something we enjoy doing and we feel good doing versus somebody saying, Alex, I really need you to take all the sticky notes off the sticky note pad. I mean, I can do that, but I would be bored to tears. But give me some sort of a puzzle to solve, things like that. I'd much rather do that. So when you're working with your volunteers and you're onboarding somebody, really take the time beyond an application to find out what they enjoy. Have a casual conversation. It doesn't all have to be a formal interview of, I see you've applied to do X and you're available these days and here's your experience. I don't ask for references for our volunteer applications, but we do a volunteer interview. And on the application, somebody might say, I was referred by so-and-so former volunteer or somebody who's known to us in the organization. But we take some time to have some conversation and learn some little fun facts about that person. Because when they feel comfortable and relaxed with us, they're going to bring up, oh, by the way, I have this special skill. We had for years a really wonderful volunteer who passed away earlier this spring, and he, among other things, made sliding boards. And you may be familiar with this, but they're a wooden board that's probably 2 or so feet long that helps somebody transfer from a wheelchair to a regular seat. So it's just it's a sliding board. You slide right across it, you scoot yourself. Sometimes they get chipped at the end, and nobody really wants a splinter in their rear end, or to get a splinter in their hand when they're moving it. And so Chuck would take these home. And in addition to his other volunteer work, he would take the sliding boards home and he would sand them down and refinish them so that they were smooth and usable again, and we could recycle them back to the next patient who needed them. Chuck got sick at the end of last year. And he lived about 40 minutes away from Shepherd. So we knew that this was kind of the end of the road there, but it was still definitely a need within the organization. We use sliding boards every day for our patients. That's not something that's ever going to end. And we didn't have anybody on staff who really was a woodworker or comfortable with that kind of skill set and knew what they needed to do. Well, luckily, my volunteer coordinator, in just casual conversation with one of our volunteers, it came up that he enjoys woodworking. I mean, that is not something that you would ever put on your volunteer application to volunteer in a hospital. We don't have a need for woodworking. But because she'd gotten to know this other volunteer and got on a conversation about how he liked to spend his time outside of work and volunteering, she knew about this. And so she was able to call him up and said, hey, we've got this need. We had a volunteer who did it for years and he's not going to be able to. Is it something you'd be interested in doing? He was thrilled. He was so excited because it's a creative outlet for him. It's something he can do. It's not an every week or every day kind of a thing, but it's as needed. He's here anyway, so he could pick up the sliding boards, take them home, work on them on a weekend, and to know the value that he was adding, because in his other volunteer placement, he was interacting regularly with patients. It was perfect. It was such a win-win. So get to know those other volunteers and learn what those other kind of one-off skills are they may have. You never know when you're going to need somebody who knows how to refinish sliding boards or teach math or things like that. We talked a little bit about placement descriptions, but making sure that volunteers really understand what you're asking of them, whether it's a one-off placement or a regular placement. You know, we ask our volunteers to commit to 1 shift a week for a 3-month period, which is not a lot to have to do. And of course, if you have vacation planned, if you're sick, that's fine. We're not going to tell you, we're not going to ding you on that. But we expect you to show up for your assigned placement every time you're supposed to be here. And if you can't come unexpectedly, we expect you to call and let us know that, so that we don't think that something has happened to you, because the people who just kind of ghost us, we're going to assume you're no longer interested in volunteering and make you inactive in our system versus, oh, I was just on vacation for a couple of weeks. It's things like that that should be really basic and really easy, but I think more and more you may be experiencing the same thing. We're seeing more kind of lack of communication skills. And I wouldn't even say it's necessarily younger. It's more of how people are used to communicating now and being in touch. And sometimes you have to remind them, this is our expectation of you. We want to provide a really great experience for you, but we need you to help us from this perspective. We do some of that. We have a volunteer agreement that we have them sign when they onboard, and they sign that annually as part of their annual in-service process. But sometimes you just need to remind people of those things. We all know that a little thank you goes a long way. Every time I see a volunteer, I say thank you to them, even if it's just in passing, and they know that I mean it. And that is not the reason that our volunteers continue to volunteer. It is not just me. I'm not taking all the credit. But saying thank you when you see a volunteer, they remember that. And it doesn't matter who you are, it matters that you did it. And so appreciation is really important. And certainly as we are on the cusp of Volunteer Appreciation Week and all up to our eyeballs in all the things we're about to be doing over the next week to celebrate our volunteers, it's the big things and the little things. So I have a document that I will share with Sydney to share with you, and it's, if my math is right, 85 ways to appreciate your volunteer. They are big, they are small, they are mainly small, and many of them are free because a lot of us in volunteer services do not have super deep pockets, and we cannot provide really expensive things for all of our volunteers. But that's okay because they don't care about that. They care mainly about the value that they feel when they volunteer within our organizations. But there are a lot of different things that you can do to be that little extra bit of sunshine for your volunteers. For example, birthday cards. If you're not already sending birthday cards to all your volunteers, do it. It's really easy. We pull a list. We use Volgistics for volunteer management, and we pull a list around the 20th of each month for the next month's birthdays, just so we can plan ahead. We order birthday cards from a company online, and now there's just two of us on my team, but there used to be three, and we would just all sign a little note. They get addressed, and we put them in the mail the week before the person's birthday. And I cannot tell you the number of volunteers who stop by our office and say, thanks so much for my birthday card. Some of them are new volunteers. Some of them are volunteers who've been at Shepherd longer than I have. They appreciate a birthday card. And especially now when more and more communication is electronic versus actual pen and paper, it is so nice to have that birthday card arrive in your mailbox on or around your birthday. It is a small investment of time and money, but it has a really large impact. Thank you notes. I mean, this is obvious, right? But have you ever had a volunteer who has really gone above and beyond, or helped you with a big project, or just really was kind of the person that you needed in that moment? Take a few minutes and send them a thank you note. It doesn't have to be long. Dear so-and-so, thanks so much for your help at the conference. You made it so much easier for all of us, and we really appreciated your presence that morning as you greeted our attendees. Thanks so much for being part of our volunteer group. That's all you have to write. And again, somebody receiving a thank you note at home from you is a really big deal. What about writing a thank you note to the family of your volunteer? Thanks for sharing your person with us. We really appreciate them. I actually received one of those notes one time, and I thought that was really thoughtful, because they're recognizing the impact that person's volunteer time may have away from the people who care about them at home. You can make a donation to the annual fund. And I say this and people go, but wait. But here's the thing. You can make a $25 donation to an annual fund, and you can honor 10 volunteers with that. You don't have to do $25 per volunteer. When I make a donation to our foundation here at work, anybody who is acknowledged through it gets a note. A donation has been made in your honor by Shepherd Center Volunteer Services. And maybe a note, thanks so much for being part of whatever the thing was. They don't know how much money I gave. They'll never know that. But if there's an organization, whether it's your organization or if there's perhaps a nonprofit aligned with you, and it makes sense to make a donation to that annual fund, and it's something that would mean something to that volunteer, It's a really nice way to recognize people. I do that with another organization I'm a member of at the end of the year to thank a committee, and it's usually 15, 20 people, and I make a donation. And they each get an acknowledgement card. And again, they're getting something in the mail and somebody's made a donation in your honor. And they don't stop and think, oh, I bet she only made a $5 donation. They just think, wow, that's really meaningful. Sometimes we have volunteers who are experts in certain topics or are really good presenters, and there might be an opportunity for them to be part of a presentation for something, whether it's a presentation to internal leadership or maybe at a meeting you're having. Maybe you've got a lead volunteer who does pet therapy and they want to talk about that experience. What an honor for somebody who runs a volunteer department to say to your volunteer, hey, we'd love to have you speak at this luncheon, this meeting, whatever it is we're having. That's a big, I mean, think about how when somebody higher up in your organization comes to you and says, I'd really like you to present on this topic because I know you're the expert, that feels good to you. That same feeling gets transferred to your volunteer. And now they're even more deeply invested because they feel like you see them not just as a volunteer, but as somebody who brings real value to that organization. And we know that's how you feel about them anyway, but it helps to reinforce that feeling to them. So think about if there's an opportunity for them to speak. We at our volunteer dinner every year, and we're doing it differently this year, but usually what we have done, we have a program called Promotion. It's a self-paid fitness program downstairs in our gym. And we have volunteers who are fitness buddies. And so I think of it as personal trainer light is how I describe it. A workout program has been created by our exercise specialists, and the volunteer helps assist one of the clients through their workout. So they might help set up equipment for them, things like that. And we often have one of those clients come and speak at our dinner about the value that the volunteers bring to the program. So maybe you flip it on its side, and maybe one year we have that volunteer talk about it. We're going a different route again this year, but think about ways that you can spotlight those volunteers to both internal and external audiences. Managing up is so important, and it's something that I think we do really well here. But when you're in a place where you can talk about a volunteer and the contributions they make and their value, not to their face, but to other people. When I'm with my CEO or my COO or anybody in senior leadership, and I had the opportunity to talk about our amazing volunteers and the difference they make, whether it's mentioning one by name or all of them as a group, I do it. And I'm really fortunate that our senior leaders have always valued our volunteers. But make sure the people around you and higher up understand and appreciate those volunteers. Tell them people's stories. Tell them, let me tell you about this great volunteer, Carol, I have, who comes in every Tuesday, and here's what she does. And we're still lucky to have her. And here's why. Because they don't know, they don't necessarily have a chance to interact with those volunteers. So if you can remind them of the value that our volunteers bring to every organization, because we know we can't do it without them, and make it personal to that person you're speaking to, then when they encounter that volunteer, they say, oh, Carol, that's who you are. I was just talking to Alex about you last week. She was saying what a great job you're doing in that placement. Thanks so much for that. And now this volunteer has this random encounter with somebody they didn't even know knew their name, who knows how great they are and how much they contribute and really appreciates them and shows them value. And again, now this volunteer says, I am at the right place. I'm appreciated. I'm valued by the people around me. And I'm so glad that I'm volunteering here. Those are just a few of the different things you can do. There's a lot of the silly little food puns. You can get little mints and say, thank you for your commitment, things like that. They are silly, they are cute, they're easy. And sometimes everybody just appreciates a really good pun, but there's so many different ways you can appreciate and recognize your volunteers. Think about what works for you. Do not try to recreate the wheel because that's just too hard and we don't have time for that. But anything that you can do that helps a volunteer know and feel that they are appreciated, that they're valued, that they make a difference in your organization is going to be really helpful to you. So like I said, remember and recognize their value. They all do things great and small. We've all had the volunteer who's probably come sat in our office for 30 minutes and told us a lot of things, but they are valued and they are appreciated, and we want them to know that. Like I said, I say thank you to every volunteer that I see, and I do mean it, and they know that I mean it. And it's important to me that they feel that gratitude coming from me, even if I'm not the one actually onboarding them. I do get to know them personally, and I love that. I've got a volunteer, actually, the lady you see in this picture, that's Mitzi. She has been here longer than I have. She comes alternating Wednesdays and Thursdays. So next week she'll be here on Wednesday for us, and she's a clerical volunteer. She also does some patient feeding. She and I are friends. I mean, she's my friend who happens to be a volunteer. I didn't know her before I worked at Shepherd, but every time she comes in, we sit and we visit and we chat, and we've gotten to know each other really well, and we remember birthdays and things like that. You don't have to be best friends with all your volunteers, but they want to feel like you're their friend. Um, and that's important to them. And as a volunteer, that's important to me if I feel like I've got a good rapport when I'm going in somewhere and volunteering. You want to know when there are big life occasions. My kid's getting married or having a grandbaby, things like that. That's exciting. You want to celebrate those things with them too. And you want to have the opportunity to congratulate them or be there for them when there's something really hard going on or there's been a loss of a family member. If you can build those relationships, you will get more out of it and they will continue to feel connected as well. We get really reliant on our volunteers. They're awesome, amazing people, and they do a lot in our organizations. And sometimes it's really hard when they say they're going to go on vacation and be gone. I have a volunteer who was just gone for 6 weeks on vacation, and I had to remind myself that she's a volunteer and that's okay, and she's allowed to do that. The world will go on. Shepherd will not stop operating, but we miss her when she's not here, and that's a good thing that we miss her because it means she provides really valuable service and she has missed being here. So she's really excited to be coming back. Today will be her first day back. So it's reminding yourself, and it's like I said earlier, the great acid test is if a volunteer doesn't show up, does the work of the organization continue? If no, that shouldn't be a volunteer placement, and that's a problem. So does it mean that you improvise when the volunteer is out? Sure, that's fine. We'll do it. That's not a problem. But we want them to feel welcome while they're here, free to take the time off when they want and need it, and know that the door is open for them to come back when that time is done, whether it's a short break or somebody who perhaps needs a longer medical leave or something like that. We want this to feel like a home for them and a place where they really feel committed and part of the family. Um, Demonstrating their impact. It's easier in some areas than others. I have volunteers who come early in the morning and they are breakfast feeders. So we have some patients who, because of their spinal cord injury, are unable to feed themselves, or maybe they don't have a lot of dexterity, and some of you may see that too. And so opening a milk carton might be difficult, or cutting waffles because they don't have that strength, but they're still able to feed themselves. Those volunteers come in every morning and they either do that or they literally feed those patients. They see the impact of that work every day. Somebody doing clerical work might not see it as much. And so we need to remember to illustrate what that is. Thanks so much for coming in because you've helped us do this, and this is the lasting impact that it will have, or here's what the ripple effect. So make sure they understand, even if they don't always see it themselves, how their work impacts the work of your department, of a certain department of your organization. And most of all, have fun. One of my kind of, I guess, famous lines is if we're not having fun, we're not doing it right. We have a lot of rules we have to follow as a healthcare organization. That part's not so much fun. But if we can get through all that stuff so our volunteers can come in and really enjoy the work they do and the people they're interacting with, and leave here every time feeling like they've really contributed something, then we're doing it right. And I think that's the case in any volunteer organization. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That is the end of my formal presentation, but happy to answer any questions anybody may have. There are no stupid questions. I've asked them all myself. And Jared, you win for super cool background, by the way.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's really informative, and I think it covers a lot of topics that all of us universally, doesn't matter if we're at a hospital, a senior center, a social services organization, finding ways to appreciate volunteers on a budget, retain volunteers, and just show them that we authentically care about what they're giving us that's huge.
Thank you. I agree. Sometimes the little things have the biggest impact.
1000%. I know when I used to work for the SHIP program, I started the happy birthday campaign where we would send birthday cards, and I have the worst handwriting on the planet. If anyone in the SHIP program has ever received a birthday card from me, I apologize. But that's definitely something that I would love if any of our local programs or regional programs want the state to send a birthday card or a thank you card to a volunteer. Please send them up my way and we'll get something created and send them out. So not only are they getting it from you all, but they're being, like Alex said, you know, the commissioner of a department of the state knows who I am and sent me, a thank you note. Like, how cool is that?
It's amazing, those birthday cards, y'all. I mean, seriously, probably once a week. Thanks for the birthday card. It's great. During COVID, we made a card for Volunteer Appreciation Week, and I did a big grid of pictures and just went to Zazzle and did that. And we did there a couple of years. We did a holiday card, which involved us getting in costumes. We got a little creative because, like I said, we love a good costume at Shepherd Center, and we sent those out. And so we quit doing that once COVID was over, because we were back face to face with our people. But the birthday cards have continued, and they always will.
So one thing your stories were fantastic, and I think really put your entire presentation into perspective for a lot of us, because it's like, yeah, we've heard that, but then you gave the real life example. And I think we can all figure out kind of how we can incorporate those stories as well, or even have those stories, and we never really thought about it. You mentioned a couple of your volunteers who've recently passed away. Are there ways that you recognize those volunteers and kind of and their legacy? And can you give us an example of kind of how you've done that?
We've done it a bunch of different ways. And it kind of depends on the volunteer. And you've had the volunteer who's volunteered with you for 40 years, who, created a program and all that. And you probably recognize that person differently than, sweet Miss So-and-so who volunteered for 5 years in the back office filing and maybe nobody knew. And not to say that we value our volunteers differently, but it was really a matter. There were a couple of volunteers we lost early on in the first few years that I was here, who one in particular was a former patient. He was a dual diagnosis. He'd been both spinal cord and acquired brain injury. And we always teased him that he was just an overachiever. And he was. And he was a longtime volunteer and very well known to staff and the whole volunteer community, and had been really engaged. And we'd actually nominated him a year or so before he passed away for a local community service award, and he'd been one of the winners. And so because he was known to everybody, I mean, Thursdays were Hawaiian shirt days for Brian, and he always wore his Hawaiian shirt. It was kind of a thing. And so we have a monthly volunteer newsletter that we send out, and we just put a little blurb in the newsletter, sharing with our volunteer core that he had passed. And he was young. He was probably in his mid 40s at the time. And he had been sick. It was not a sudden tragedy. And so that in that moment, that was the appropriate way to do it. In other cases, we don't really publicize it because, on one hand, what if you're sending an email and people are like, I don't know who that person is, but we make a donation to our foundation, in that on behalf of volunteer services in memory of that volunteer, to recognize their contribution. And so that way the family receives an acknowledgement and say, a donation has been made in memory of so-and-so by volunteer services. And that's our way of acknowledging it. And of course, I go to the funerals. It's the not fun part of our job. But I always make sure, and for many of those people, I'm the one that they know because the woman who hired me used to be the director. And so I always make sure, if there's any way I can get to that funeral, that I do. And so that I have a chance to speak to the family. Even if they don't know me, I can introduce myself, because when I say, I'm Alex, I'm the director of volunteer services at Shepherd Center, and they say, oh, she loved her time volunteering with you. Thank you. So it's nice to be able to make contact with that family and thank them for sharing that person with us and for that gift of time that has meant so much to us.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. Anybody else have any? I didn't see any questions come into the chat, so please feel free to unmute and share your thoughts or questions, comments. Going back to something you started with the orientation, I know that's something that I am not great at, and I'm not, and all of our programs vary in terms of background screening and cost of doing all of that. I do the screenings for all the volunteers that come into our organization, and we're able to do free screening. So it's not necessarily a financial strain, but absolutely, if you're spending a lot of money on the front end and not really talking to the volunteer about your program. And then you've not only lost that funding, but you've also kind of lost quite a lot of time. I know that's something that I need to improve upon for orientation, possibly even before I send volunteers to our other programs.
There's actually, I was at a national conference in March, and we always learn from all our peers. There's another organization, another hospital that has a self-assessment on the volunteer page of the website. So before you even complete the application, it's like a 5-question, and it's not it's not like you have to score a certain thing to be able to move on, but it's a little questionnaire for you to reflect on. So when you go to my volunteer page and you think you want to volunteer, she asks questions like, here's what our expectation is of volunteers. Does that feel comfortable to you? Here's what we expect. And it's really, really high level. So it might say, we expect our volunteers to give X number of hours. And if you say, well, I don't have that kind of time, well, then that's fine. But then you don't even bother volunteering and going through the application process in the first place, which I thought was a really good idea. And it's not something that we do, but I thought, oh, I wonder if we should maybe do that, because, again, if it saves somebody some time, if it saves you the time of trying to onboard this person, and then you get them partway through the process and they say, oh no, I was never going to commit to 100 hours of volunteer service in the first time. And you're thinking, well, I really wish I'd known that before I'd spent all this time on the back end trying to get you onboarded. So I thought that was a good idea to consider, if there are, maybe 3 to 5 questions or bullet points that you put out there, so that before somebody even gets to starting to submit the application, they know, or at least they've had the opportunity to know, whether they pay attention to it or not, this is what we're asking of our volunteers. If you move forward in this process, these are our expectations.
Great. A question came in. Would you be willing to share your 85 ways to acknowledge volunteers in addition to the presentation slides?
I will send both to Sydney.
Awesome. And I'll get those out. My goal is no later than the end of the day tomorrow, Monday at the latest, if something happens. Going to the thank you cards. Have you ever had any of your clients write thank you cards to their volunteers?
Not so much that, because there's really, that Fitness Buddy is really kind of the only place where you get regularly paired. But what I have done is asked people who lead volunteers in other departments. I mean, they get cards from us, they get all that, but asked the people, the manager or somebody or a senior leader in the area where volunteers serve, to write them thank you notes. And I will send them the list of the volunteers and their address. I'll even send them some little talking points, and they can personalize their own, because sometimes they're like, I don't know what to say. So I'm like, here 3 to 5 sentences, pick the one that works for you, make it sound like yourself. They're not going to all read, compare notes together and say, Sherry wrote the exact same thing. But again, that helps to manage up, because now they know that the senior leader above the person who reports to them as volunteer knows what they do and who they are. And that means a lot to them. And that's a point of pride.
Absolutely. I was just thinking of some of our, like maybe our senior center programs that have an exercise class. Reach out to those participants and say, hey, do you mind dropping a note to your leader, and saying thank you, like, because of this exercise class, I've been able to help my mobility. Or our clients who we do home delivered meals to, if they would write a thank you note to the person who delivers them their meal.
Oh, they'd love that.
Yeah, just like a special touch that not only are the senior leaders, but also the people who they're actually having an impact on are getting that, they're getting that directly from that person.
And that note, I mean, I hope you all have this in your office. I have a file in my drawer of notes that I have received, thank you notes I've received from various people while I've worked here. Because we've all had that day. See, Sydney's got, you've all had that day where you're like, nobody likes me, I'm terrible at my job, and I'm just going to go like sit in a field and cry somewhere. And then you pull out those notes and read them. And to have that tangible, I keep saying it, but to have that tangible thing that you can look at for that person, that volunteer who's delivered that meal to that homebound senior, to be able to keep pulling out that note and be like, that was so sweet. She took the time to write this note. And it's a warm fuzzy.
Absolutely. When a client in our program sends a thank you, I scan and email it to the volunteers who served them. So that's
awesome.
really important, as well as we get feedback about what a volunteer does well. We make sure we tell the volunteer that, hey, this person reached out. Thank you.
And
Great
I
work.
do, if I get an email from somebody from staff saying, oh my gosh, we like every now and then I go on, Stannis has been so amazing. We give it to him. We also print up a copy and we put it in his volunteer file.
Absolutely. I think that's everything that's come in through the chat. Does anybody want to come off mute and ask a question or share something that they've done? Okay. Well, real quick before we wrap up, and thank you so much again, Alex. You're getting a lot of praise in the chat on how amazing your presentation
Thanks, guys.
has been.
I've loved doing this stuff. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Just wanted to give everyone a reminder that our next webinar in the series is going to be May 16th. And we're going to be talking about navigating dementia with volunteers. And this is going to be with Keita Cole, who is our Aging Program Director for Nutrition and Statewide Dementia Coordinator. So I think it's going to be a dual purpose. To not only is she going to be talking about how to help our volunteers work with individuals who have dementia, but maybe looking for those warning signs in our volunteers that they may be developing some dementia and how we can work with them to not automatically say, oh, I don't think you're appropriate for this volunteer opportunity anymore, but really still help them feel engaged and not that it's, a huge life altering thing that's happening. So same week, same time, maybe same location. Depends on where you're at. And also be on the lookout next week for the release of the 2024 Volunteer Impact Report. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Almost 12,000 volunteers you've all recorded in 2023 that have helped across the state with over 532,000 hours of volunteer service. Every year, I think our numbers are going to plateau or like drop a little bit, and you all just keep getting those volunteers engaged and stewarding them and appreciating them so they all want to come back and help all of our programs. So not only is it an appreciation for our volunteers, but it's a kudos to all of our volunteer engagement coordinators and all the work that you all do to keep those volunteers engaged and showing their impact on a regular basis. All right, I think that's all we have. So with that, again, thank you so much, Alex. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll hang out for just a few more minutes in case somebody has a question that they just don't want recorded. Totally understand that. But thank you so much again, Alex. We appreciate you.